Good evening, members of the committee, officers, ladies and gentlemen, councillors, people watching at home. Welcome to this meeting of the Performance and Finance Scrutiny Committee. I'm Liz Noble. I'm chairing the meeting today in the absence of our normal chair, Sean Garrett, so please bear with me. I'm going to pass immediately to Eddie Scott regarding the IT situation today.
Thank you, Chair. Same situation for those of you who were at the committee meeting yesterday. We have a problem with the AV system so that the microphones aren't assignable to councillors or officers at the moment. Nothing for you to do differently. Just note that the camera won't be panning round to the members for anyone watching at home or joining virtually.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Can you also address the fire situation, emergency situation? Thank you.
Yeah, so there's no fire drill tonight. If you hear a loud and continuous ring, please leave the council chamber promptly and calmly. Do not use the lift, and the emergency exit in the council chamber should be only used as a last resort. Please assemble at the assembly point in the Knoll Road car park, which is indicated by a green sign. And if you have reduced mobility, come to find me in case of evacuation.
Thank you. So item 1 on the agenda, apologies for absence. Mr. Scott?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies from Councillor Garrett. Councillor White is subbing for him. Councillor Mulvagnam's joining online tonight.
Thank you. Item 2, minutes of the previous meeting. We're asked to confirm and sign the minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of September 2025. Is everyone in agreement with the minutes? Agreed. Thank you. Thank you. Item 3, members are invited to declare any interest they may have with respect to matters to be considered in the meeting. Does anyone have any pecuniary or non-pecuniary matters to disclose? No? Thank you. Item 4, public question time. I don't believe we have received any questions from the public. Thank you. So, item 5, the Surrey Heath Borough Council Carbon Emissions Report. Mr. Dent is online, and I believe you're going to lead in with your presentation.
Yes, I am. Thank you for that. I'll get straight into it. So, following the declaration of our climate emergency in October 2019, the council's been aiming to get to net zero carbon emissions across its operations by 2030. And this report monitors the progress we've made between our first carbon emissions report in the financial year of 2021-22 and to this previous year of 24 to 25. The headlines of the report are that Scope 1 emissions, which are gas use in buildings and the fuel the fleet uses, have reduced by 11% across the reporting period. We've reduced our Scope 2 emissions, which are our electricity use in our buildings and across our fleet, to 0 tonnes of emissions, from just over 400 tonnes of emissions at the beginning of the reporting period, which means combined across our Scope 1 and 2 emissions, which are the emissions that the council has the most control of, we've reduced these by 65% across the reporting period. Scope 3 emissions, which cover our procurement, staff travel, and a number of smaller emissions groups, has stayed roughly the same over the reporting period, but that's expected as I'll go into detail. So in a bit more detail, looking at our Scope 1 emissions, there's been a small reduction in emissions from our building emissions. However, that's not even across all of our building types. For example, in the buildings that the council operates day to day, such as the theatre and Surrey Heath House, we have seen a more sustained and larger reduction. Unfortunately, in some of our other sites that the council owns, such as in the square, we have seen an increase in emissions, and that's largely down to the number of properties that we've been managing as leases have come to an end. For example, the House of Fraser site in 23. Fleet emissions have also seen a sustained drop since we first started measuring them, and that's due to a move towards electrifying the fleet. For our Scope 2 emissions, these are now zero. This is due to the fact that the council procures REGOs. This ensures that our electricity is linked to a renewable source. Again, reductions are not uniform, and we see the same pattern whereby sites operated by the council day to day have seen a 19% reduction in emissions across this reporting period. For example, again, if we look at the square, emissions have actually increased 27% over this same time frame. Scope 3 is the most difficult set of emissions to calculate and often comes with much weaker data, particularly so for procurements. And so we don't expect to see a large change in this emission section. For example, due to the insufficiently accurate data methodologies we have for calculating procurement emissions, we use the same figure in each year. This is the largest source of emissions we have, equating for 98% of total council emissions. Emissions from staff commutes have also seen a bit of fluctuation since in the 3 years that we've been actually recording it for. And this is due to changes in office behaviour post-COVID. We don't have any data from before COVID, but it's expected that there'll be a very significant reduction in emissions as staff work more flexibly now. Emissions for staff travel for business operations, which, for example, could be attending meetings or other business activities, has increased significantly in the last year. But in reality, this is due to a more accurate reporting system that's been implemented, and we would expect mileage to have stayed relatively flat across the reporting period. And finally, we have two smaller groups of emissions, which are transmission and distribution emissions and well to tank emissions. And these are directly correlated with the gas and the electricity use that we have on our sites. And so they have the same patterns as we previously discussed above, but in much smaller numbers. That is the end of my introduction. So I welcome any questions if there are any.
Thank you very much for that very thorough report. See, Councillor Nomal Kang, you have a question?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. Is there any proposals to install any PV solar panels on any other building?
So at the moment, we have work ongoing at the square, and that is a lot of roofing works. And once that's done, there are plans for that to include a large solar canopy on the site, so that will hopefully have a big impact on emissions there. Some of our other sites, it comes into long-term building use and the age of the buildings, for example, or the shape of the roof in itself. If we take Heath House, for example, the building's not particularly doesn't particularly work for adding solar panels on it. But we're trying to identify opportunities where we can and implement them.
Councillor Wheeler and then Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Victoria Wheeler, Windlesham and Chobhamord. One of the things that I notice when I come to the building, as we've moved to a more flexible working pattern with our staff, the seats of those staff don't seem to have been changed. And very often on a single floor, there will be one or two people actually in the office, and yet the whole of that floor is heated and lit. And I wondered what steps we can take to maybe look at closing certain areas at certain times and moving to a more hot desk system so that we reduce the need to light and heat all floors at all times.
I believe this is something we've looked at already regarding the separate wings of the building in Heath House in particular. It's something we can continue to look at, but haven't got any plans with at the moment. But I can speak to colleagues, to estates colleagues, and work out if there's anything from stopping us moving forward with that.
Thank you.
Councillor Richard Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you for the report, and it does seem to show a reduction in emissions. And it's not just when we reduce carbon dioxide emissions, it's not just carbon dioxide that's been reduced, it's all the other products of combustion, like oxides of nitrogen and particulate matter and unburnt hydrocarbons and so on. So reducing emissions has all sorts of other benefits as well. But what I was trying to get from the report, and I couldn't quite find it, was a sort of conclusion. Are we being successful? Are reductions in excess of targets? And you know, are we actually making the improvements that we were expecting in emission reductions? Thank you.
Thanks for the question. There will be a follow-up report detailing that. I wanted to try and keep this as brief as possible. I know it's already quite a long one. So we have looked at this, we tend to look at this yearly, and we have found that we have been making good progress against some of our targets. So particularly looking at our scope 1 and 2 emissions, which are really where the council has powers to directly reduce emissions, we've made reductions that are in line with where we would look to be at this stage in terms of our 2030 target.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. If I could come back and expand, I know this report is just about emissions, but the Climate Change Act includes work on emissions and targets, regulations on that, and it also includes a section on adaptation. I know this is a different subject, but it's about how society can cope with climate change and how life can go on and with expected climate change. Is there a separate line of work, a separate report we'll be getting on adaptation? I know the council already deals with this in things like planning applications about future flood risk and things like that, but is that part of your remit as well, to look at adaptation?
Thank you for that. It's quite a complex area, adaptation, to be honest. So the council already looks at certain things like flood risk within the borough. There are things that you pointed out, such as in planning, where we have, again, applying things around flood risk and heat risk for buildings, and trying to make sure that new builds done in a responsible way. Trying to pull that all together into sort of one report or one piece of work can be quite hard and disparate, because it impacts so many areas and so many individuals and organisations within the borough. So it's not something that we have done so far, whereas we have those separate work streams in which there is input into, and we work quite closely with county on developing their adaptation plan as well. So it's stuff that we input into, but there's not been one direct accumulation of that work.
Sorry, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. And just to kind of finish that line of thought, the Climate Change Act regulates emissions, and we've heard about how that isn't just on climate, it helps with keeping the air unpolluted and the water unpolluted, and it covers adaptation, about how society can go on and people can still survive, basically, when climate change occurs. And the Climate Change Act it was basically the first act of any country passed to deal with climate change, and it's been the model for lots of other countries like France and Denmark. And now the Leader of the Opposition wants to abolish the Climate Change Act. What sort of effect would that have on efforts to target emissions and to deal with climate change? Thank you.
So I think you mentioned the Climate Change Act, and that has been something which has spurred on action within the local government area, and many of our own climate emergency declarations came at around the same time and linked towards the 2015, in many cases, more ambitious dates of 2030. In terms of the difficulties or not that may be experienced depending on the change of legislation, I couldn't really say. It would depend on what alternatives came forwards in reflect of that. But it is clear to see that the Climate Change Act has been a benefit in spurring action. But until we saw whatever might come forward, well, I wouldn't want to answer that too strongly.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions? Councillor Murray Rowland.
Thank you, Chair. It may be a naive question, but I thought you mentioned when you were talking about House of Fraser and other property we've taken on, that there's been an increase in the use of energy there. As those buildings are empty, I understand. I kind of quite understand how that would be the case.
So yeah, in some sites, and work has been undergone to reduce energy use in sites where possible, but in some of them that could be refitting works before they're leased out. So there's energy use there. Some of it is for general heat to make sure there's no damp or mold that gets put or takes root in a building or on a site. So there are reductions in the energy use compared to a fully operational building, but there's still some necessary elements that are used on a site-by-site basis.
Councillor Rowland, do you have?
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, it's just to come back on Councillor Rowland's point about the increasing emissions from the Square and House of Fraser buildings. So I think, is it correct to say that there is an increase because they're now the responsibility of the council because the buildings and sites within them are empty, and that means that rather than be responsibility of whatever shop was going to be there, because the units are empty and the House of Fraser building is empty, there is a certain amount of, even though they're empty, there's a certain amount of emissions created, as you just explained, but that's the council's responsibility now. So it's not just a massive financial albatross around the neck of the council, it's also something that's increasing our emissions and causing environmental damage, even though they're empty. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. So in terms, sorry if my previous answer wasn't clear, but you summed it up very well in terms of the responsibilities that we have for buildings that currently aren't leased, and that comes down to how carbon accounting is actually done and undertaken. And so as an organisation, if we own a building but it's let out, it's the organisation that directly operates it day to day that would be responsible for those emissions. And in our case, when another site ends a lease and it becomes under the operation of ourselves, then the emissions that are associated with that site do get accounted into our carbon footprint.
Councillor O'Mahony.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question about the EV fleet and the public chargers. So we presently have 30% fleet is now EV, 46 new public chargers owned by Surrey Heath Borough. I just want to know, do we have any data on utilisation rate for those chargers, uptime, etc.? And do we have any data on the fleet in comparison to ICE vehicles as a baseline for maintenance, fuel costs, etc.? Maybe I should have emailed this in earlier as a question as opposed to plonk it now, but...
That's fine. Thanks for your question. We do have data on the, so I'll take it in two parts. On our public EV chargers that are able to be used by any member of the public, we do have data across our sites, and we have information on income generation and the energy demand from those sites. So I can provide that information. I don't currently have it to hand, but I can, and I'm happy to share that information. in terms of our fleet, we haven't done a baselining exercise in terms of how fast we've been moving to decarbonise our fleet versus other councils. And in terms of the actual costs savings that we've seen from that exercise, we have different owners of different vehicles, and so we have slight different reporting that's done in that, and we need to work on pulling that together into one place. But again, I will be able to get you something on that if you would like me to.
Yeah, if you could share that with the entire committee, that'd be brilliant. Thank you.
Mr Stevens.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. If I can just come back on Councillor O'Mahony's question. It's difficult for us to compare the cost of the new EV vehicles we've got versus the previous ICE vehicles that we had, largely because of the age. The EVs that we're purchasing are new or nearly new, whereas the previous ICE vehicles were of a certain age where their maintenance costs were significantly higher. We know that the electricity cost is lower than the cost of diesel and what we previously paid, and we can probably provide that to you. But we'd be comparing different things if we were looking at maintenance costs that we were previously paying for our ICE vehicles versus the EVs that we're using now.
Thank you. That's a pity. I was hoping it would show the obvious benefits to EV, which is, well, is what it is.
I think you're right. I absolutely agree with you. The maintenance costs generally for an EV are lower because you don't have such a complex internal combustion engine in place. But I don't think we have anything by way of clear data that would demonstrate that. Although we can compile it, I think anecdotally our service costs at the least are very, very low in comparison to the diesel vehicles we had before.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Councillor White.
Could we have more information on the planting of the 6,000 trees and bushes on the council-owned green spaces? Has this started? Where have they been planted? And where are the others going to be planted?
Thank you for your question. So yeah, these have all been planted. Sorry, I should clarify that. All apart from 2,000, which will be done before the turn of the year, or aim to be planted before the end of the year. So I think that's 14,000 now that we have planted. They are in a mixture of our different green spaces and the different types of trees, bush and fruit trees that we have been planting are aiming to fit those different sites. So, for example, down at Windermere Sang, there's been planting of fruit trees and stuff like that to help give residents sort of different experience when they're visiting that site. To hand, I don't have exact locations where all of our trees and bushes have been planted, but I can speak to our officers and our green space team and try and compile that if that'd be helpful.
Thank you.
Any more questions? No? In that case, then, we're asked to note the report. Thank you, Mr Dent, for your assistance and work in preparing a very thorough report. So we are asked to note it. Is everyone in agreement? Agreed. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr Dent. You're welcome to stay if you want to, but I quite appreciate if you don't want to. I'd like to welcome Ms Barrell to the meeting now. I believe Ms Barrell is going to present the housing needs, social housing and temporary accommodation update, which is agenda item 6.
Thank you. So just by way of introduction, so at the end of March 25, the previous housing services manager retired and the new housing resettlement and communities manager took on responsibility of the service, so that's myself. So the report covers the past year's performance in housing services, as you say, covering disabled facilities grants, housing advice and homelessness, temporary accommodation, rough sleeping, social housing and our floating support service. So before taking any questions, I'd just like to draw your attention to the following key points within the report. So there have been 131 disabled facilities grants completed in the last financial year. So for 25-26, we've received just over £1 million allocation for DFG. And this year has also seen the introduction of a trusted assessor officer post funded by the Better Care Fund, which is supporting to reduce waiting times for DFG works. So in 24-25, we received just over 1,000 homelessness approaches. 112 of these cases triggered a homelessness duty, of which 81 cases of homelessness were prevented or relieved. Lawrence Lodge, which holds 32 of our temporary accommodation units, is to remain in use until June 2026. Joint working is underway to secure future TA prior to it closing. We had 61 households that were placed in bed and breakfast across 24-25. So during 24-25, there were 5 known rough sleepers in the borough. Connaught Court, which is our supported accommodation, successfully supported 17 individuals, and the emergency accommodation, which is run on behalf of Surrey Heath by the Hope Hub, accommodated 34 individuals. At the end of 24-25, there were 502 households on the housing register. 141 households were awarded permanent accommodation in the last financial year. And in 24-25, we had 36 new affordable property completions, and we have 69 more in development for delivery between 2025 and 2027. The Floating Support Service received 84 referrals in 24-25. This service is funded by Surrey County Council to deliver holistic support to enable positive and sustained move-on housing options. There are 3,608 social housing homes in the borough, of which Accent Group own approximately 82% of them. The remainder are owned by other registered providers. I'd be happy to take any questions that anyone might have.
Thank you, Ms Burrell, for a very thorough report, and thank you to everyone in the Housing Department for all the work that they do. Do we have any questions, please? Councillor Wilson and Councillor David Half.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the report. A question on the disabled facilities grants. I think I'm thinking about the time that it takes to get from the start to the finish, and the start is when someone is referred. So how does the initial referral happen before the assessment's made? Is that, I mean, I've done it as a councillor, but surely you can't be waiting for councillors to refer everything. Is there a more sort of regularised way of referring people?
Yeah, so our formal referral form is accessed through the Surrey Heath Borough Council website. So there is a specific page on the website where it takes you through to the application. Generally, those who are seeking a DFG will be supported either by professionals that are working with them, or often family members that are supporting them to complete that application. We do also get contacted directly into the team for those who may be suitable for a DFG. And at that stage, we will signpost them to the website to make an application.
That's great, thanks. And so from an initial referral for a case that is assessed as being worthy, how long would be, I don't know, it depends on what's going to be done, but something like adaptation to a wet room, what would be disappointingly long time frame for that to occur in?
So the average time kind of our standard DFG works take is around 52 days. So we would be kind of expecting between 6 to 12 weeks. That's if it was any longer than that, we would be concerned. But yeah, as I say, the average time taken is that 58 days.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have Councillor David Huff, then Councillor Murray Rowlands, and then Councillor Sachin Malvaganen.
Thank you, Chair. just a question around Lawrence Lodge and the closure in June 2026 for redevelopment. I was just update really on the progress and the talks that are happening about securing alternative temporary accommodation before the site closes, so the families and people that are currently sort of supported or need that support are assured of temporary accommodation being available. And is it being looked as a sort of like-for-like replacement, or would it be smaller, separate accommodations? How's the sort of progress going on that?
So we are in conversations with Accent in terms of future planning, because we are keen to continue working with Accent. What that future temporary accommodation will look like is unknown at this stage. We would be looking to ensure that any future temporary accommodation kind of meets the up-to-date needs of our households that go into TA, so the majority of them being families. I think when we come to the stage where we are moving households from the temporary accommodation, they will always be our priority. So we will be looking to work really closely with Accent as the current owner of Lawrence Lodge to ensure that that is as smooth as possible for the sake of our tenants.
Thank you. And is it sort of guaranteed that there will be suitable accommodation once the Lawrence Lodge closes in June, and those families, it won't be, oh, we are not quite ready, we're going to have to put you up in the B&B? Is it sort of hoped that that will not happen, and it will be a smooth transition from one set of accommodation to another?
That is absolutely the hope and the aim that we are working towards, which is why we're having the conversations now. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Murray Rowlands, then Councillor Sashima Vagnan, then Councillor Nomal King.
Thank you, Chair. Could I just ask on point 1.6, somewhat unique event in local government, an underspend and money available. Have you any idea, is there any idea why that money could not be spent? And for the future, is this a factor of not being able to identify the people relevant for that particular funding?
So in terms of the underspend, so it will be very kind of dependent on the works that were carried out. We will always be looking for best value in terms of things like equipment and contractors that are used. And it may be that actually during that time period, the works that were being carried out were not as costly as we would have predicted. That money is ring fenced. So what that means is that we are able to then carry it forward to the next financial year to use and utilise in the service should it be required.
Could I have another one?
Yes, please.
Looking at 2.4, this moving into respond to where there's threatened homelessness. Do you feel that the way we're proceeding, where this becomes necessary, is working, or are there problems related with identifying people who actually are in need of housing? You feel it? We've got an effective way of doing that.
Yeah, so I mean, homelessness is quite strictly governed by legislation. So the Housing Act and the Homelessness Reduction Act. So when a household approaches as homeless, there are quite stringent processes in place to assess that, to then identify if they are ODA prevention duty, of which 2.4 relates to. So from the perspective of officers, we will very much kind of follow the homelessness code of guidance around assessing those to then identify what duty is owed to them.
Mr Stevens.
I think if I can, Councillor Rowlands, just to add to Ms Burrell's response on 2 points. Sometimes with the disabled facilities grants, we've got works that are in progress but haven't been completed yet. So there's an element of carryover where the works or the planned or proposed works might start in January, February, but not be completed until April or May the following financial year. So sometimes some of that carryover is actually ring-fenced for existing DFG applications. And I think the other thing I'd say in relation to 2.4, the housing team are incredibly good at resolving a lot of these threats of homelessness, because they engage with the landlords on a very regular basis to try and resolve any issue there may be about that relationship between the tenant and the landlord, and also sometimes get involved in domestic disputes which might cause someone to become homeless. And they're very, very effective at doing that, and that, I think, comes out within the figures that you see in the report in front of you.
Thank you, Mr Stevens. Councillor Sashi Mervagnan joining us online.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for the report. It's a very good report and very comprehensive. But I've got a couple of doubts, and Councillor Depew has already asked you this question, but I want a clarification, please. It's regarding the Lawrence Lodge. I know it's owned by Accent, but what if they don't make the date? Would they accommodate them? One. Secondly, how many children are involved in that? If there are children, who gets a priority? Families with children, or parents or mothers with children? And it's important for us to understand, because children, I'm sure, is more priority than more anyone else. A third question for you, not kind of related, not related really. Given the national bed and breakfast expenditure rose by 27.2%, according to the report, where are we regionally or within Surrey? Are we within the national level, or are we above it, or who is leading the game here? Thank you.
Mr Stevens is going to reply.
So I can pick up some of that, Councillor Mervagnan, if you'll allow me, and I think Emily will probably come in with more detail. In relation to Lawrence Lodge, it is temporary or interim accommodation. It's not permanent accommodation. Effectively, what will happen at some point leading into June is that there will be no new admissions into that property. And therefore, we'll work with Accent and other providers to ensure that there is other interim accommodation elsewhere within the borough. So it won't be an abrupt stop. There won't be people that will be effectively kicked out of Lawrence Lodge. We'll make sure that there is a transitional approach, as Ms Burrell said earlier on. As a consequence of it being temporary or interim accommodation, the number of children there does fluctuate, but I'll ask Ms Burrell whether or not she has a current figure. I would also say as well, your question about the June deadline, ultimately that is when the planning consent expires. So that is why it's quite a fundamental date for Accent and also for us. We're obviously speaking to Accent on a number of levels within the organisation. The Chief Executive of Accent has given us assurances that he will work with us in a very pragmatic way to ensure that if and when Lawrence Lodge closes, it's not an if, it is a when in fact, when that closes, there will be a plan in place to ensure that we still have comparable accommodation, if not better, because it won't have communal parts. Clearly there is an argument about what commencement of an application looks like. So it could very well be you'll end up with a split site, so there'll be some development on site that might take place, including some demolition, but some units may also remain in place beyond that June date, and that's what we're trying to flesh out with Accent themselves. The last point you raised about B&B expenditure and where we sit on the scale, I will also leave to Ms Burrell, but my understanding is we are very effective in the work that the housing service do, and therefore our B&B expenditure is quite low.
Thank you. Just to add on in terms of Lawrence Lodge, and as you said, the families that are there. So Lawrence Lodge is a predominantly family-based temporary accommodation. So the way temporary accommodation works from a legislation perspective is prior to anyone being placed in accommodation, they have to meet a set of priority needs. So for anyone that we have placed in Lawrence Lodge, we have already identified that they are a priority and we have a legal duty to accommodate them. So as and when it comes to the stage of moving individuals or households on from Lawrence Lodge, they are all the same priority, if that makes sense. So no one would be prioritised above another. We would be looking to move them all on in an equal stance. In terms of the B&B costs, so we have actually seen a reduction in the amount of B&B cost in Surrey Heath. So just in terms of some of the figures that I've got, so for 23-24, we had a net spend on B&B cost of just over £129,000, and then for 24-25, our net cost was just over £81,000.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Noel Kang.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted clarification on point 3.8 on the private rented sector. It says dropped substantially. I just want to know what percentage it's sort of like really dropped by, and also if these are, I mean, you're giving assistance to private landlords. I mean, if you advertise it through an agent will take a month's rent. Presumably, that would be beneficial to private landlords. And secondly, if they're on low income, do they get support to pay market rents?
So in terms of your first question around the percentage that the PRS has dropped, that's certainly something I can look into and come back to you on. So with trying to secure private rental landlords to take on our households, so we run a scheme, as it says, called the Rent Choice Scheme, which provides the deposit and an upfront rent of up to kind of 6 weeks. We have a lettings negotiator in the team who works really closely with landlords in the borough to try and support households to be able to access their accommodation at affordable rates. So even if that is that they if a household is receiving housing benefit, we would be very much looking to try and get it as close as possible to that. We will not accommodate a household where we don't think it's going to be affordable for them to move into that private rental, but it is becoming more difficult because of the reasons that I've noted in the report to identify and secure affordable private rental properties for our clients.
Councillor Kang.
Just follow up. Are these properties with private landlords in a bad state, or are they selling because of the Renters' Right Bill? Are they?
It's a combination. So landlords are selling because of renters' rights, and they are selling because of the increase in the rates on the mortgages. Actually, it's no longer affordable for them. The properties that we look at to support our households into will and do meet all the minimum requirements that we would expect from a property to be able to accommodate a household. But it is very much kind of, we believe, around renters' rights and the introduction of that, as well as the increase in the interest rates on the mortgages.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. It's a question on Section 5, the Housing Register and Allocation of Social Housing. So the 4 different bands, one of your colleagues was kind enough to give me the joint allocation policy, which I've read. But I was wondering about how a a family, a person on the register, it could change from one band to another. So if the level of needs changed, are they automatically reassessed? Can they apply to be reassessed? And can this apply to people who have already been housed? If the needs change and they need a certain different type of housing, whether it's size or some other type of location or whatever, is there a process that they can go through to apply to be reassessed? Thank you.
Yeah, so for anyone who is currently on the housing register, if their circumstances change, we would invite them to contact us to notify us of those circumstances, and dependent on what those circumstances are would then depend on whether that then changed their banding, but that would be something that would be assessed dependent on the individual information that they shared with us. If somebody is already accommodated, they can apply to join the housing register, again, dependent on their situation and their circumstances. If they meet the criteria for joining the housing register, then that is something that we would explore with them and could be an option for them.
Thank you. And there is a process for this that they could go through. It's not just a sort of ad hoc, one at a time.
So yeah, so they would make the application to join the housing register, and their circumstances would be assessed during that period of application.
Thank you.
Councillor White, then Councillor Murray-Rowlands.
Going back to Lawrence Lodge, a couple of years ago I was involved in the planning application request for this property, and one of the reasons for the planning application was that the property was not fit for purpose, and I think it was empty at the time. Then all of a sudden you were putting residents back into it. The planning application that runs out in June, is that for the rebuilding of the property or is that for something else? And is there a guarantee, if it is for the rebuilding of the property, that it is going to be rebuilt and not just repurposed again as a inferior property?
Mr. Stevens.
I'm happy to take this one. I'm sure Ms Burrell is happy for me to take any questions on Lawrence Lodge. My recollection might be a little bit longer than hers. Yes, you are right. There was a point in time where Lawrence Lodge wasn't required by the Borough Council. And we did confirm to Accent at that point in time, which was a little bit before my time, that it wasn't necessary for us to house tenants there as interim accommodation. Unfortunately, that very rapidly changed. There were challenges around the standards of Lawrence Lodge. It is a set of units with communal kitchens and communal bathrooms, and their condition was deteriorating. But we worked very closely with Accent to ensure that actually the facilities were improved. There were challenges around fire safety, which were addressed immediately before reoccupation as well. So new fire doors, new fire detection systems were all put in place to make sure that it was entirely habitable and of the standard that Ms Burrell suggested. So unfortunately, it was just due to the nature of fluctuating demand that we said no thank you, and then we had to go back with cap in hand and ask them to reopen it and recommission it for us. Apologies, there was another section to that, wasn't there? In relation to the application, it was probably the one that you considered as part of the Planning Applications Committee, Councillor White. That hasn't changed. They would need to implement that scheme or apply for an alternative scheme. There is no in-between.
But if it's made empty by June, it will remain empty.
Ultimately, they have until June, as I understand it, to implement the scheme that was consented by this planning committee. If they don't, they'd have to reapply for that scheme or a different scheme if they wish to do so.
Thank you. Councillor Murray-Rowlands.
Yeah, this is a perpetual question, possibly over and above the 500 or so we've identified. There's also people who, and I can't find a mention of them, people who don't have qualifications to be eligible for possible social housing, and you come across them. And I think there's a number of cases where this is the case, that they don't have the qualifications to be responded to in that way. There's no mention of that problem. Is there any way we can deal with that problem of people who are classified as not having the necessary identification with the borough to be assisted?
So for those who aren't eligible to join the housing register, what we would do is we would notify and signpost them to speak with the relevant local authority where they would potentially have eligibility to join the housing register if they were eligible. So there are certain groups of people who wouldn't be eligible to join a housing register because of their circumstances. So, for example, a homeowner wouldn't be eligible to join a housing register. There may also be circumstances where people who are deemed as being suitably accommodated and can financially support themselves would potentially not be deemed as qualifying to join a housing register as well. But for those individuals who don't have a local connection with Surrey Heath and their local connection is elsewhere, we would be signposting them onto the local authority who can support them.
Councillor Owens.
Yeah, can I ask about with new build coming on, the possibility of new build for the people on our large waiting list, what prospects do you see in the near future of being able to offer them something from what we're looking at as new build for the authority?
So we work really closely with the registered providers who are creating the developments of the affordable accommodation. So when those are ready, they will put forward the properties to us. And we advertise them through our Surrey Heath Home Choice system. So those that are on the housing register can bid for those properties. So it would be a case that anyone who's on the housing register, they can bid for those new build properties. And if they're successful, they will be offered those.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions? Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. It's about the homelessness approaches. So in section 2.1, well, the graph there is frightening. And I think the former Chief Financial Officer of this council gave evidence about this to a parliamentary select committee about how homelessness approaches are going up. And I guess my question is about the inevitability of further rises. In section 2.2, it says a couple of the reasons for these increases in homelessness are Brexit and the Liz Truss mini-budget. If there's a period of more stable, responsible government, is it possible that this kind of crisis could abate a bit, or is it inevitable that the number of homelessness approaches is going to go up and up?
Mr.
I think there. Go on. Are you going next?
If you're sure, Ms. Burrell, I'm more than happy for you to take this one. The paragraph 2.2 alludes to a number of factors, and I think that one that we haven't mentioned in relation to the challenges around private landlords was the fact that previously the interest related to a particular mortgage for a buy-to-let was effectively written off. It wasn't something that you would be taxed on as an individual or a private landlord. That changed a couple of years ago, and that's what has resulted in private landlords struggling within the market and certainly struggling to offer affordable rents. As Ms. Burrell suggested, rents have gone up as a consequence of private landlords incurring additional cost, and that's an increase in interest rate, but also an increase in the way that the interest is treated as to whether or not it's deducted from their tax burden. There are a number of other challenges, you're absolutely right. I think the fundamental change would be the treatment of that interest in relation to a buy-to-let mortgage, but also a reduction in interest rates, which may mean that more private landlords come back onto the market. But it is very much a may. I don't think we can predict that. But that certainly, from my perspective, is something that has caused a significant issue with affordability for private tenants, and therefore they're knocking on our door and the doors of other districts and boroughs, asking for accommodation. It's a fundamental challenge, and I don't think there's one single fix. There have been a number of housing forums and seminars trying to resolve this issue, and it really is a multifaceted challenge that has multiple approaches that need to be invoked.
So it is inevitable then that it's going to get worse. I mean, the building of new homes around here, affordable homes in inverted commas, is basically 80% of market rate, which is as rent or to buy shared ownership, which is really not affordable. And the shared ownership model is deeply flawed, as well as ties people into a contract that is really not good for them. So it is inevitable that these contracts are not going to work for people. The so-called affordable rents are not going to work for people. And there's going to be a growing gap, as the report says, between the level of housing benefit and what you can rent a house for in this borough. So it's inevitable housing approaches are going to go up and up, and the crisis is going to get worse and worse.
It's difficult to have a crystal ball and say it's inevitable that it's going to go up, but I can't see anything at the moment that's going to make it any better. We do have policies around affordable provision and the percentage that should come forward on any major development, but that comes very much down to viability. And with a fluctuating housing market where values are actually starting to plateau or drop, developers will argue that the viability simply isn't there for them to offer a full level of affordable provision as they should. And that's another challenge. I can't give a broader answer than that, I'm afraid, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions? Councillor Rowlands.
There is one mention of the Ukrainians. A few months ago, probably, they would figure more largely. What exactly is our position on the refugees, the Ukrainian refugees, and what is actually happening as far as they're concerned at the moment?
So if we have approaches from those who have visas under the Homes for Ukraine scheme, they will be treated and assessed from a homelessness perspective in the same way as any other customer would, should they approach. The Homes for Ukraine scheme is currently still open for individuals and families to arrive in the UK, and there hasn't been any suggestion that that will be closed at this stage. But from a housing perspective, as I say, they are treated in the same way as any other customer who approaches for support.
Do we know how many are presently being helped by the council and how many are being offered accommodation?
I can certainly get the figure for you. I know that it's not a huge number. It is a real minority in comparison to our wider demographic, but I can certainly get that figure for you.
Councillor Malvaganen.
Thank you, Chair. So just a question following up with the Councillor Rowland's previous question. How many young people do we actually accommodate, refugees that is? How many young persons as refugees do we accommodate within the borough, or do we pass them on to the central government and they they pass them on to us and we put them in our accommodation? Do you know how many of them we accommodate?
So similarly to Ukrainians, anyone who approaches looking for support would be assessed in the same way as anyone else. So if we owed them a duty, if there was a requirement to put them into temporary accommodation, we would do so. But they are very much kind of treated in the same way that we would treat any other client. We don't collate specific data in terms of refugee status or kind of anything of that similarity for those that approach. It's very much done on the basis of their eligibility around homelessness.
Thank you. Can I follow it up, please? I'm more concerned about the young people rather than the adults. I mean, There are young people arriving in the country, and they are being distributed around the country? How many do we get?
So is this as in under 18s? Yeah, okay. So we don't have a duty to accommodate them. So that is a statutory duty that sits with Surrey County Council for unaccompanied individuals. So that would be information that they would hold, and they would accommodate them until their 18th birthdays.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions? Can't see anyone. Okay. So we've been asked to review the housing performance over the last 12 months. Thank you, Ms Barrell, for your report. Thank you to everyone in the Housing Department for all the work that they do. And thank you for a very thorough report. Thank you, councillors, for reviewing this. Are we happy to agree the report? Great. Sorry, Councillor Rowlands, was that a... That's fine, you put your hand up. I didn't know if there was another point there, so thank you. So thank you, Ms Barrell, for your time this evening, for staying late. We do appreciate it. We move now on to the last item on our agenda, the work programme. Does anyone have any comments or wish to add anything, make any changes?
Just to mention, in respect of the January 26th meeting of the committee, we've received a request from the Head of Service and Joint Waste Services, I believe, to consider the procurement of the waste collection service as a pre-decision scrutiny item before it goes to executive.
Councillor Rice, do you want to add anything on that?
I'd be very supportive of it coming to scrutiny.
So with the addition of that coming to committee in January, is everyone happy with the work programme as laid out? Yes? Okay, thank you. So that's agreed. With no further items on the agenda, I'll close the meeting at 8:01. Thank you all for your time. Thank you, everyone.